Hello, welcome everyone. Um, Welcome to the Feminist Bird Club's Bird Names for Birds discussion panel tonight. My name is Martha Harbison. And First of all, I'd like to ask all of the participants to turn their cameras on so everyone can see your lovely faces. Hey, there's everybody, or almost everybody. There we are, yay, awesome. So we're going to have, I've been very much looking forward to this discussion tonight. This is something that has sort of overtaken a bit of my life in the last 6 months, or maybe 5 months. So I'm super stoked to be able to speak to people and hear their opinions about it. There are two things of note before we really dive into the discussion. Number one, we're going to have the chat box open, but we request that everyone be respectful. We know that this is a topic that can drive a lot of emotion in many different directions, and so we would just prefer that you stay respectful even if you disagree with somebody's take. Yes, second, I would let you know that we are recording this session, so just let you know for that. Anyway, so if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. We will have a Q&A section at the end. And then the last thing before we hop in, trying to figure out how to say this, but we would like to acknowledge is every time we go out birding, every time we talk about birds, if you live in North America, you're living on land that was stolen, and that act of theft from Native American Indigenous peoples, those effects are still felt today, and really have yield a lot of negative impacts for people. And so I would just ask that as we have this discussion and as you go forward in appreciating the outdoors, to remember that every time that you go out that you are on unceded territory, no matter where you are. Except for the courses where the areas that you are actually on territorial, on native territory. With that, I would like to get in with the introductions for everybody. Again, my name is Martha Harbison. I'm the Vice President of the Feminist Bird Club. I use they, them pronouns. And I've been working with the Bird Names for Birds initiative for, I don't know, the last 5 or 6 months. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Rutter. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the co-founder and do the communications for Bird Names for Birds.
George.
Hi, everyone. My name is George Perry. I use the pronouns he/him, and I'm a young Black birder. And I would say I've been birding for about well over a year now, and it's just been absolutely amazing discovering and learning about new species of birds. I'm also a volunteer at the Pelican Harbor Seabird Station, and it's just awesome because they are dedicated to rehabilitating injured and sick wildlife.
Thank you. Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess McLaughlin. I've been involved with Bird Names for Birds since things got rolling a few months ago, and my role in that initiative is to do some of the background research on these people who have birds named for them, and also to write profiles to share what we find with the broader birding community. Because I think that's a very important aspect of what we're doing is just sharing these stories, because a lot of people just don't know them. So, and when I'm most of my time, I'm a PhD candidate at University of Oklahoma, but this is one of my things I do kind of on the side.
Thank you. Isaiah.
Hey y'all, my name is Isaiah Scott. I am a young Black birder, naturalist, artist, and I've been birding for 3 years now. I've enjoyed every opportunity and doors have opened from bird watching, and I'm starting a bird art business called the Rookery Collection, which I'm starting up soon. And some of my favorite birds are the painted bunting, and yeah, that's me.
You already got some fans in the chat box there. Hey, Jeff. All right, so I'm gonna hop into some of the questions. Also, I'm gonna say Molly Adams, the president of Feminist Bird Club, is monitoring the chat, but they wanted to stay on, stay off camera today, which is totally fair. First up, Jordan, can you explain what Bird Names for Birds is?
Yeah, thanks, Martha. I'm going to start by kind of setting the scene just for us right now, because none of us knew this. It was total coincidence when we planned this event. But today is a very important day. Today, September 26th, is actually the 137th anniversary of the very first meeting of when the American Ornithologists, it's a mouthful, Union met in 1883. And they met to bring together ornithologists, and they also met to talk about nomenclature and bird checklists. So it's just incredible that we're meeting and having this webinar on that anniversary. So I won't go into all of it. Please check out our website, birdnamesforbirds.wordpress.com, for more. But basically what happened was this moment in time that we had this spring, especially, that started everything, really, it called me and my partner Gabriel Foley, who's the other co-founder, to action, both for ourselves to do personal learning and growth, as well as for our community. We consider the bird community our own identity and group of people, and we wanted to do something. And what could we do? Well, we could speak up about the issue of bird names, which ultimately is something that all of us meaning the folks that I've talked to, overlook these names. So even if you look at the background right now of my Zoom, this is a Clark's nutcracker. And growing up as a birder, I just accepted it. I never asked really, who was this person? Why did this bird get that name? But then as you started asking questions, you found out that these men didn't have very good pasts that we should be honoring, not to mention the fact that it's become so much more than just the bird names themselves. It's become part of the systemic racism that is part of our community and even our society. Because when you think about it, a white man was the first to, quote, describe this bird, and he named it for another white man. And there are still mostly white men talking about and making decisions on bird names. And that's a problem. It can be so much better. And birds never gave me a history lesson. So it's time that we acknowledge our history, learn our history, and do better for the future to make the birding community more welcoming and inclusive. So again, there's so much more I could say about this, and it's all on our website, but I definitely don't want to take more time because I want you to hear from George, Isaiah, and Jess.
Thank you very much. I am actually going to direct my next question to Jess. Jess, you've been doing a lot of research and writing the biographies of a lot of the people after whom the birds have been named. You give us a couple of examples of some of, your least favorite egregious, or I don't want to say like, what are your favorite awful people, but a couple of examples of people that you found during the course of this work.
Yeah, so I mean, what was kind of one of my, I think for me, like a lot of people, my entry point into this discussion was the naming of the McCown's longspur, which thankfully is now the thick-billed longspur, and was like kind of like, I realized like I didn't really actually know that much about McCown. I didn't know that much about a lot of these people. I had a vague idea of like, Audubon and Townsend like being these naturalists and maybe doing some shady stuff, but I didn't really know much about it. And so I, even though I'm professionally a bird nerd, I am also a history nerd a bit. So I was like, start looking this up. And I've been doing most of this in conjunction with Alex Holt, who is, I believe, listening tonight. Hey. But one of the things that I found that was kind of eye-opening was, there's a lot of these names that are for people that, they're not as big of figures in, they're not ones like Audubon where we kind of have an image, even if it's pretty hazy one of who they are. Like, I had no idea who, okay, Bachman's sparrow, for instance, had no idea who Bachman was. And that was one of the first profiles I actually wrote, was on John Bachman, for whom both the sparrow and then the sadly likely extinct warbler are named for. And he was a naturalist. By all accounts, he was quite a good and perceptive naturalist. There's a Natural History Society in Charleston, South Carolina that's still named for him. But he was, his day job was as a Lutheran minister. I need to double check. It's actually, I might be, there's a lot of ministers in these, so I might have the denomination wrong. He was also very interested in classification of all manner of the natural world, birds, plants, but like a lot of other people, he was also very interested in human classification. This was in the early 1800s, and that he was mainly working. And you might have picked up on it, he lived in South Carolina. And he was one of the many naturalists who was weighing in on developing, quote unquote, race science and trying to classify humanity by different races, and using that in his case as a cornerstone of him arguing for the continuation of slavery. He also collected and shared shared with others his skulls from indigenous people and slaves to further these theories. He was, he was and one of the things that's the most disturbing about when you read his things, at first it's like, oh, well, he's arguing that all humans are the same species. Oh, good. This is heading in the right direction. And then you read his justifications of, well, we're all the same species, but we're all still different, and therefore it's right that we enslave others. And he was using both his theological background and his prominence as a naturalist to back this up. So there's a lot of these people who fall into that mold. Another one is William Hammond, the namesake of the flycatcher. And for me, like most other people, my introduction to Hammond's flycatcher was, okay, this is the particular type of gray empid we have in our neck of the woods, and didn't really give much more thought to it. And William Hammond lived in a similar time frame, and he was in the Army. Many of the North American eponyms are for people who were in the Army, who were kind of amateur naturalists as they were, going to these postings in the West. And again, he seems to have been, pretty decent naturalist. His main claim to fame, though, because he was an Army doctor and an Army surgeon. He was actually the Surgeon General briefly during the Civil War. And he's America's first neurologist. So this is all sounding really, really cool, right? Really great. Well, he didn't collect skulls. He collected brains, including while he was stationed in Kansas, requesting that his soldiers under his, I'll admit I'm not a military person, so I don't know if they were technically under his command or just like he had sway over them, but basically asked people who were going out to kill indigenous people to bring back for his collections. And after the Civil War, he was on the Union side, but after the Civil War, he really built his neurology practice. And as his status as a neurologist grew, he started to weigh in on other social issues of the day, including in the later 1800s, the question of whether women deserve the right to vote. And he weighed in by saying, well, you know, their brains are too different. And it's just, you know, my professional opinion as somebody who studies brains is that they are not capable of having the right to vote and being full citizens. So yeah, he's got a bird name for him. It's great. I don't know if you want me to break up the other two I wanted to highlight for later, or just keep going.
Yeah, maybe like when we do like the interactive section, we can, you know, hop into the other two and we can talk a little bit more and even save one for the Q&A.
Yeah, so we'll when I just want to make sure I don't. So these stories, like, these were ones that had me like wanting to hurl my laptop at the wall. The profiles that I wrote and like putting up the quotes to kind of show what these people were writing, because they didn't hide this. They were proud of their work. You know, you just want to bleach your keyboard after having to put some of those quotes into the profiles to illustrate it. So, you know, and there's more examples of this. We'll get into the namesakes of Scott's Oriole and Zantu's Hummingbirds when we come back around to me. But I just wanted to give you kind of a brief look at some of the first up on the list. So.
Thank you. That is fascinating. I actually didn't know about Hammond, so now I know.
It is all I can do while I write these profiles, not to swear.
Take a walk. You're like, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath now. Excellent. So actually, I wanted to go back, Jordan, just a little bit. Just to clarify, bird names for birds, when we're talking about wanting to essentially change the names, we're only talking about the eponyms, right? So only birds that were named after people.
Yes, thank you, Martha. I was thinking about that too, that I was trying to be so speedy, I glossed over some of the important details for folks. So an eponym is when a human name is put upon another item. It could be an invention, or it could be an animal, such as a bird, and it's meant to be in honor of them. So again, like my Zoom background, this is a Clark's nutcracker. So recently, we had McCown's longspur get changed to thick-billed longspur, which is fantastic. That then changed the count to 149 eponyms for birds between Canada and Panama. That's just North America, the continent. There's more worldwide as well. And so our initiative is very focused on those eponyms because we believe that it's all or nothing in terms of how you change them. White people especially, again, because most of the folks that are in charge of bird names are white men, we do not have the right or capability of saying what is racist or not. It is all or nothing because, again, it comes into that systemic procedural aspect of it. It's more than just the names, it's all of them. So yes, so 149 eponyms. There are other names that we could talk about, but I will definitely save that for another webinar.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I think a lot of people have saw the flyers that we were passing around for this webinar and also on the splash screen right before we started. So I'd like to turn my next question to George. Because I believe that you're the architect of some of those drawings. Could you tell me a little bit about where they came from and how you know how it ties in with bird names for birds? All right, you're muted. You may want to turn it on and off again. Can anyone else hear George? Nope. Okay. We'll come back to you, George. Yeah, you may have to hop on and basically hop off and then hop back on again. Let me pull up my questions. Oh, sorry, I live on a busy street. Sometimes you get ambulances. Isaiah, I'm going to turn to you for a second. Could you tell us a little bit about the Instagram Live event that you did with George and what the genesis of that was?
Well, it all started when I found George on Instagram, and it was actually someone, he did a post about burying owls, and it was on someone's story, and I was like, oh, who is this? And then I was looking, and I was like, wait, is that another like young Black male birder just like me? Like can we be brothers? Like, what's up? And so I went and messaged him, and I was saying like, hey, I love your content. I saw your burying owls, and we just started talking and becoming more and more friends. And so, and then we FaceTime each other to like actually talk and like get to know each other more. And I brought the idea, which was, I was actually inspired by our live from Jason Ward when he did a live about renaming honorific birds. And he would like share with the audience and like say, like put a picture on his laptop and show like the honorific bird, and then he made a whole list where other people can join in and put in like suggestions on Google Sheets, and I was on that list, and I was so I shared with George about all of that, and I wanted to do something similar to like Jason did, but have it more like broadcasting and have, you know, more people come on the live and to get more ideas and just to bring birders together. And so yeah, we made a flyer, we posted it, and it went from there. And that's how our first live started. And then George, I came up with the idea, but George, he pretty much, he's the one that took that and came up with all these ideas, like the drawings and the different format and like the different speaking points that we should have. So George really took it and just took off with the idea. So
that's awesome. Hey, George, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I think just to echo off what Isaiah was saying, this was all his idea, you know, and I just thought that I can make it a little bit more creative, you know, with doing the drawings of the different species of birds. And the first bird that I thought I should draw was the thick-billed longspur, formerly known as the McCown's longspur. And I just thought it would be a really cool idea to, like, you know, cross off the honorific name, kind of symbolizing, you know, change. And, you know, I also thought it was really cool to have the 4 words at the bottom of each picture saying, because birds deserve better. You know, because I really do believe that they do deserve better names that are more suitable for them. And yeah, you know, it's just, I thought the drawings are really cool. And yeah, all credit goes to Isaiah, man. You know, it was really awesome.
Was there one bird that gave you any trouble drawing? Like, you're like, I just can't get the eyes right? Or
I think probably the Cooper's hawk. I had some issue with that. You know, I was at first going to draw like a big picture of just its head. But, you know, I then thought, you know, maybe I should like have the whole body and it like perched up on a wood log. So yeah, I think that one gave me kind of the most trouble.
excellent. And does actually because birds deserve better, is that what's on the piece of paper behind your head? Just want to double check.
Yeah, yes, I have here. Yeah, I have all the different birds: the McCown's longspur, Cooper's hawk, and Clark's grebe. So yeah, you know, just you know, we're really pushing for change. You know, because we believe birds deserve better.
Awesome, thank you. Jordan, I'm going to turn back to you a little bit for another question. This is from a conversation that we've seen happening online, and some people suggested that the eponym should be replaced with indigenous names. Could you comment briefly on that?
Yeah, so I'll admit that as a white person, that seems to make sense, right? We're talking about colonialism and racism, and it seems that we should respect indigenous cultures and honor them in that way. The problem is that I am a white person saying that, and we really need indigenous communities and individuals to be leading that conversation. So we need to hear and acknowledge and respect what they have to offer and say. We need to validate their history and what they're contributing to birds. So it definitely is a much more complicated question and answer than the face value of it. I also want to highlight that this is another important time where we do that territorial acknowledgement, because when we're talking about 149 eponymous bird names just from Canada to Panama, there are incredible overlaps of indigenous communities in that space. And I want to recognize that, because for a widespread species like a Cooper's hawk that George has drawn and mentioned, a white person should not say, well, this indigenous community's name for that bird should be the one picked over another indigenous community's name for that bird. So it's much more complicated, and we want to make sure, again, it gets to that procedural aspect of being respectful, of taking everything, all stakeholders into account. But I also think that it's important we acknowledge that we're all not there yet. We're going to talk about some, ideas we have for new bird names, and that's the fun part, right? Because we get to talk about birds. But we also need to make sure that we're all at the same starting line with this issue, and then make sure we proceed from there as a collective, because we need to have those steps in place to do this right.
Awesome, thank you. Now we're going to go to some round robin questions. So these are going to be questions that all the panelists, if they wish to answer, can. So my first question is something of a personal question, but also like comments, I think, a little bit on larger ornithology, birding, and just outdoor communities. Number one, which is, why is this topic important? Why is it important to you personally? Why do you think it's important to birding, or anybody that's connected to the natural world? And I'm going to ask George first if you would like to answer that.
Yeah, so I believe that this is important to me because I just think that, good people deserve good things, and bad people don't deserve anything. And so, because these white men have had these pasts of being racist and doing these terrible things, I just believe that they are undeserving of having names after them. So I just think that, with giving birds that have names that better suit them would just be great, because it would just, I feel like it would just, be a good step in the right direction for the birding community. So yeah, I just believe that it's only right.
Thank you. Isaiah, why do you think the topic is important?
Well, I think this is very important if we as birders in the birding community want to proceed and grow and to diversify in order to save bird species and for conservation. I think some issues, some systematic issues in our birding community need to be resolved, and it needs to be comfortable for people. And I just think, and for the birds as well. Well, also I'm part indigenous Cherokee, and I just feel some type of way that the Native Americans here on this continent they've been experiencing and seeing these birds for thousands and thousands of years, and for, you know, some foreigners to come over here and just totally just take that away, just take everything away from them, including the birds, and just switch it and put something else over it. It's just kind of, it's not right. It's not right at all. And I believe that needs to be, like, our past. It needs to be dug up and dealt with in order for us as birders to come together as a community of different races, ethnicity, backgrounds, just whoever are, in order to proceed in the future. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Jess, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, like, I'm relatively privileged. Like, I'm white. But I've certainly faced, even with that, I faced my fair share of being told that I don't belong in birding or in ornithology more generally, because I'm queer, because I'm non-binary, because I come from a relatively lower socioeconomic background. So, like, I didn't grow up getting the chance to go on vacations, to go birding in these fantastic places, and, you know, couldn't even really afford binoculars as a kid. And so, you know, for me, going through that experience and then seeing that, you know, it's something that happens even more so to so many of my, you know, my friends and my colleagues. And just, that's, you know, I really believe strongly that, like, you know, I have to fight to kind of make a seat at the table for myself in a lot of ways. So if I'm going to do that, I better just fight to make a whole bunch more seats, and, you know, maybe just build a new table. That'll be more fun anyways. And as I've been going through it and learning more about, like, why, and learning more about the history, and it really bothers me that, you know, we know, you know, we speak these names of these people who, you know, it's not, when we have a bird and we give it that name, you know, naming it for a person, like, you know, yeah, there's some historical information conveyed in that, although, as we'll get to with some of the people I'll talk about later, that's not always even very accurate in and of itself. So it really is a monument of a sort. It's something given in honor. And the fact that we're honoring men, because it's almost all men, who thought that, so many of my colleagues, that, you know, they would have thought they were more, like, they would have looked at them and seen specimens rather than scientists, and that's disgusting and gross. And why are we honoring these people? And it's something that, you know, this won't solve, you know, this isn't solving, like, equity problems in ornithology or inclusion issues in ornithology. But, and, you know, I've had some people comment, like, well, this is all very symbolic. Like, why? But symbols do speak to what we value as a community. And therefore, you know, and if we're fighting this much over changing the symbols, you know, that speaks to, maybe we're not as good on, the problems run even deeper than we want to admit. So that's where I come into it.
Thank you. Actually, you bring up an interesting point, which my next question was really gonna be, like, what's the response been? So, you know, clearly you've, you know, had responses about symbolism. Any other, you know, general trends that you've noticed?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a strong, like, there's definitely people who I have talked to who support it, especially, like, there's a lot of people that, I think the most common response I've had from people is that, you know, their first response is like, well, I don't really get it. But, like, you know, and they'll pull some sort of, like, well, you know, back in the day, it was totally acceptable to have a collection of human skulls to measure and classify humans with their worth. And, like, who are we to judge by the standards of our day? And I'm like, you know, and it's like, well, first of all, there were people, like some of these guys absolutely like in their letters will say like, yeah, I feel really weird about this. Grave robbing like seems really weird. And maybe we shouldn't, but like also I'm gonna do it anyways. Like Townsend has some journal entries to that effect. Like, why do these people want to kill me when I steal their loved ones' remains? Weird. So like they knew to an extent deep down what they were doing was wrong. But, you know, so, and what, you know, once you start explaining that history to people, they start to get it more. And when you start to talk about some of these, you know, some of what's wrapped up in here and how it's not just, okay, well, you know, this guy, you know, was an officer in the Confederate Army, and like that very much flattens the picture. And so when I've gotten responses that kind of don't get it, my response has been to reply with telling a story. And that's why I ended up writing all the profiles. So I've had some intensely negative responses from people. I've had some lovely Twitter comments telling me that I have too much time on my hands, which as a final year PhD student, I find absolutely hysterical. But you know, I think it balances out. That, you know, on the whole, it's, you know, the people, like, I feel like it's in some cases a problem of like telling the story, and, you know, and obviously that's a big emotional labor and intellectual labor to ask. And, you know, since, you know, I'm relatively more privileged and some of this doesn't hurt as much in a way, because it's not as close to me. I see it as kind of my responsibility to do that work when, you know, there's people for whom that would be a lot harder to do. And that's one of the things I can do to try to make a little difference.
Awesome, thank you. George, what has been the responses you've noticed from, you know, people when you've talked about this?
Yeah, so, you know, I really haven't been getting a whole lot from others. You know, I remember mentioning to Isaiah that, like, hey, man, you know, we can probably get some pretty negative feedback from people who don't agree with what we're doing. And I just, as like a forewarning, I mentioned that to him. But it kind of really seems like people are more curious as to know why we want to change these bird names, rather than, you know, coming out and saying hurtful comments. So, you know, yeah, I really haven't been getting any hateful, you know, messages or comments and anything like that. Most people are just curious.
That's awesome. That's delightful. Isaiah, you want to add anything to that? Have you had any, like, dealt with any feedback from people, positive or negative?
Yes. I had, after me and George's live, the first live we did, the next day, well, it was, okay, it wasn't like someone being rude. I think it was just more like, out of curiosity, and wanted to like know more about like why me and George were doing this. And so I just like kindly responded and was like, and just pretty much informed him about, it was kind of like a lengthy paragraph just about like why we are doing this. And they were very nice about it, and was like, oh, okay, now I understand, thank you. And I was telling George about that, and I was saying that's probably like the nicest like response that we could probably get from people. And hopefully we will not encounter like any rude comments or negative comments. But like George was saying, I do expect it somewhere along the line. I just feel it, like someone's just gonna say something. But you know, we're gonna, you know, stay positive, keep it going, you know, just forget the haters and all that, and yeah.
Thank you. So I'm gonna have one more question, and then I think we're gonna hop into the interactive portion of the evening. This is like a very short question, but also like a very big one, which is basically, actually, you know what? I lied. We're gonna go into interactive right now, and then we're gonna go to the final question, because I think the interactive part actually feeds better into what the final question will be. So, person behind the scenes, would you like to bring up images of Scott's Oriole? The idea here is that we're going to try and rename some of these birds. That's been like one of the, I'm sure some people on here have seen how we've been doing that, you know, on Twitter and like guessing, and George and Isaiah had that in their Instagram live. It's like, all right, let's come up with, you know, the equivalent of the thick-billed longspur. So we thought that we could actually do this with the audience. So if you have an idea of what you think some of these birds should be, you know, renamed, put them in the chat box. If you have questions, you know, it's like obviously morphology would work for something like Scott's Oriole because they are very striking birds, both the male and the female. Other birds, you might have to go for feeding habits or habitat. So yeah, I would say we'll give the I think we'll give people a couple of minutes to put in their thoughts. And I guess, like, you know, any of the panelists, like Isaiah, George, do you have an opinion on what we should be renaming Scott's Oriole?
I think, you know, like from looking at its head, it's really all black from like its head kind of sort of down to its chest. And I think I saw in the chat recently the black-headed Oriole. So I think that sounds good. I'm with that.
Nice. Isaiah, what about you?
So this is the one that I came up with, and I put it down on Jason Ward's honorific name renaming spreadsheet, and we talked about this in the live as well. I pronounced it, but first I said Amarillo, but it's Amarijo. It's yellow in Spanish, pretty much. And Amarijo Oriole.
I like that. That was actually when I was actually brainstorming today. That's the idea that I came up with too, which I like. Jess, do you want to tell us a little bit about Scott?
Yeah. So this is one of the ones where, you know, one of the arguments you'll hear a lot is, well, we're devaluing these people's contribution to the history of ornithology when we talk about renaming them. But Scott's Oriole is named for a individual named General Winfield Scott, which is a very 1800s name. And insofar as I can tell, and I have been trying to find any shred of evidence, I can't tell that he really had any interest in birds. I can't tell that he had an interest in the natural world in general. His greatest joy in life seems to have been military etiquette, to the extent that his nickname in the Army was Old Fuss and Feathers. And he was a career military man, starting out in the War of 1812, but most of his career, and he kind of, the other bookend of that would be during the Civil War, fighting for the Union, where he's apparently one of those people that people get very excited about if they're military history people. Fortunately, I am not one of those. Yes, somebody just pointed out to look up what this guy looks like in the Wikipedia page. I highly encourage doing it. It looks like he's not what you expect, but somehow it's exactly what you expect. And the thing is, in between those two conflicts, the main thing, if you were a military career man in that time period, that you were going to be doing was wars of colonial expansion in the West. So his first foray into this was with the Black Hawk's War in the 1830s, but he also played a huge role in the Second Seminole War, which was just flat out ethnic cleansing, trying to remove Seminole, excuse me, ma'am, Seminole communities in Florida. And one of the things, when I mentioned him to a historian friend actually here in Oklahoma, they immediately knew who I was talking about, because it turns out he plays a role in Oklahoma history as well, and it's not a good one. He is basically the executive in charge of, he was the military commander who was in charge of executing the Trail of Tears orders and removing the Cherokee Nation from Georgia to Oklahoma. There's a lot more complicated history in terms of that, but that's kind of one of the big stains on his name. Some people will try to spin it as like, well, he let people like take blankets, so he was a humanitarian. It's like, no, you were doing an ethnic cleansing. You don't get to call yourself a humanitarian being any way associated with this. He also then later in the Mexican War, which he was a very big part of, he was just like, hey, let's just take over all of Mexico, and went and took over Mexico City before the rest of the U.S. government was like, hey, no, actually, can we not? That's a little more than we wanted to bite off. And he was apparently very sore about that for the rest of his life. General Winfield Scott, not an ornithologist, does not deserve this bird. I just wanted to throw in my suggestion on this one. I think that the citrine Oriole would be a good option. Golden Oriole and black-headed Oriole are unfortunately already taken by Eurasian and African species, but citrine Oriole is one that I really like.
So I like that too. I've noticed in the chat, and I think some other people can see, but a lot of other ideas, including some based on their habitat or what they eat. So we have Yucca Oriole is a suggestion. So yeah, I love it. I also love the fact that people are like really focusing on characteristics, some that span both the male and female birds, and so many birds are named after only the male plumage. As somebody who looks a lot at female birds and spends a lot of time studying them, that makes me very happy. So we're going to move on to the next one. Thank you, everybody, for Scott's Oriole. Next up, let's do Hammond's Flycatcher. Woohoo! We're going to do an MPID because everybody loves the birds that nobody can tell apart. Yeah, another MPID I can't ID. Yes, I feel you very hard. So who has ideas? Isaiah, George, do you have ideas on how you'd want to name this? MPID Spa, yeah.
Oh man. This one is pretty tough for me because when I was looking up like the fun facts, it says like the Hammond's Flycatcher and Dusky are like so visually similar that it's hard to tell the two apart. So man, I really wouldn't know. Like it looks like it has like yellowish on like its belly. Wow. The gray. I'm not sure.
It's okay to punt. You can be like, you know what? That one's gonna remain nameless. Yeah. Isaiah, do you have thoughts on this one?
I am not sure. I would have to do some like research on the Hammond's Flycatcher, since it is like to find. Maybe we can also try to name it after maybe a specific habitat that it loves that's unique from other flycatchers, or a behavior that no other flycatcher does, or maybe like its range. I have to do some further research with that, and I'll have that pulled up on I have my laptop here when we start, and I'll research. So, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Totally fine. Jess, you and I were talking a little bit about the habitat and where this bird breeds. So I'm curious how you would rename this bird.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked your suggestion of Oriole flycatcher, given that plays well into, you know, kind of some of the other MPID names as well. You know, it's frustrating because some of the other names that you'd be like, oh yeah, yellow belly. Well, we already have a yellow belly flycatcher. You know, oh, gray. Well, there's a gray flycatcher. Dusky, we have a dusky. A couple ones that come to mind for me would be broken-eyed, because it's got that broken eye ring. And I saw somebody in the chat suggest crescent-eyed. And that's actually when you key flycatchers out in the hand, exactly what that eye ring looks like is a really important feature. So that could be played into it. In my heart, though, they will always be named for their song, because these were one of the first ones I learned when I was first birding in Alaska, where they are the most common MPID. And they reminded me a lot of this broken, rusty screen door we had on our house growing up that had been blown open and bent in a weird way in a windstorm. So it always had this weird noise, and so these were always the squeaky screen door flycatchers for me. But I unfortunately don't think that that's going to catch on.
Incredible. No, I'm going to start a petition right now. I love that. Excellent. We're getting a lot of different suggestions. Lodgepole flycatcher. That's a nice one, actually, if you're going to actually focus on the pines. I like that. Western flycatcher, gray. We have some people in here also mentioning maybe we name it after its song, since a lot of MPIDs are differentiated purely by sound. So great. I think I'm going to look at time just to make sure. I think maybe we have time for one more. And then we're going to do the last question and then go into Q&A. So let's do Zantu's Hummingbird. So Jess, you want to say a little bit about Zantu's Hummingbird and who it's named after? This is one that a lot of people in the United States are not familiar with because it's relatively range restricted in the lower 48.
Yeah, and I just first wanted to put in a shout out for somebody in the chat who just suggested Cardarian flycatcher for the goddess of hinges. That is brilliant. So this one, Xanthus is a fun one. So first off, he's not as horrible as the other people we've talked about, for one. And he was a Hungarian naturalist. And you'll see his name written many different ways. Part of that is because there's different naming conventions between traditional Hungarian names and, American style names. The other thing is that he was, by all accounts, the first thing you will read about Jonas Xanthus, aka John Xanthus de Vesey, aka Louise de Vesey, multiple different names. He was a complete and total pathological liar. The man could not tell the truth to save his life in all appearances. And so he was born middle class in Hungary. He trained as a lawyer. And then, he took issue with the fact that Austria was in charge of Hungary at the time, which, I feel like is a very logical thing to take issue with. And as a result, when the revolution he was a part of didn't go very well, he had to flee to the US. And when he got to the US, he decided that actually he wanted to sound more aristocratic. So he gave himself de Vesey as a name, even though his family is not nobility in the slightest. And then he also decided that he wanted to be a doctor rather than a lawyer. In fairness, this was the 1800s, and medicine was basically whiskey and lies, so, it was a little bit easier. He trained under Hammond, actually, who got him turned on to natural history. So one good thing I guess Hammond did, because one thing that everybody does agree about Xantus is that the guy was a fantastic collector and naturalist. He managed to get himself sent to Baja California. So that's why this was probably one that's a little less familiar to a lot of us, except for when we desperately need to fill out a Z on the ABCs of birds. And he sent a ton of specimens back and described a whole lot of different things. The problem is it's really hard to take some of his accounts of things at face value. He published, like many people of his day, he published a travel narrative, and he did it primarily for a Hungarian audience. He published it in Hungarian because there wasn't a lot of these sorts of things necessarily circulating there, and he kind of wanted to be a big deal in Hungary. Unfortunately, the book was almost entirely plagiarized from a couple other people's accounts of traveling in completely different parts of Mexico. References encounters with cultures that were from like the other side of Mexico in tropical rainforests. He appears to have written extensively about a whole bunch of ruins in the Baja Peninsula that he was describing as a lost civilization. Does not seem to have actually existed, and sent a lot of later archaeologists looking in circles. He later managed to land a diplomatic position in Baja, New Mexico, Baja, Mexico. Oh my gosh. I am very tired because I was out bird banding this morning. So apologies. He got Baja, California. He was basically working as a consulate at the U.S. consulate, and he was working in this town and kind of as this outpost. And so he thought that the best thing that he could do was to recognize the authority of a local warlord rather than the Mexican government. This did not go over well with his bosses, and he immediately lost his position. After this, he went back to Hungary after a few other adventures and a lot more lying about things. He did some expeditions in Asia that unfortunately I have not been able to find out much about. And it seems like a lot of his papers might have been destroyed during World War II, but also possibly, I can't even find, we know that they're not really there, but we can't really even figure out when they were lost. But he's he definitely made contributions to natural history. The problem is he lied about so much stuff that it's almost impossible to be like, okay, this is a valid observation. This is total another BS that he just made up. There's like a famous picture of him in a Navy uniform that was like his official author picture for his book in Hungary. He was never in the U.S. Navy. He just did that to look good.
Just went down to a costume store or stole it out of somebody's luggage.
Yeah, so so that's we get to at least end on a slightly lighter note with him, because he's there's definitely problematic stuff that he wrote, but again, since he didn't actually write it, it's a little bit different, and he's more just almost amusing, just the sheer extent. And almost every biography you'll see of him, his profession basically is listed as pathological liar. So
great.
There we go. His name was Xantus. That seems to be clear because somebody asked in the chat. His full name, there was another second name associated with it that I cannot pronounce, but his given name was Xantus Janus, and that and then the American approximation of that would be John Xantus, which is what most people call him, but he went by a whole bunch of different names throughout his life. So
Awesome. We're not going to name the hummingbird after all of them. So it seems like in the chat that Baja Hummingbird was the winning vote, although we did see some really interesting ones. George or Isaiah, do you have other ideas for this for this hummingbird?
I think I really liked what one person said about I think someone said the zebra-eyed hummingbird.
Yeah,
and I thought that was pretty interesting because, you know, you see like the white eyebrow and then it's kind of black up on top. So I like that one. But the Baja hummingbird, yeah, they're feeling that. So
yeah, easy to remember for sure. Isaiah, what about you?
There was one about it was mentioned earlier about a goddess or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds pretty cool, and I like that name. I don't know what the name was. What was it again?
Oh, that was for the flycatcher. Was the Cardaean?
Oh, okay, never mind. Oh, I thought. Okay, never mind. Yeah, I like Baja.
All right, so we'll put that one down. So I'm looking at some of the questions that came into the chat. While I'm doing that, I guess like the last question, like I said, this is like large but also small, and we are like running a little bit out of time. So hopefully you can keep your answers like kind of short. Do you have ways, like what are your ideas for how to fix this issue? So Isaiah, I'll go with you first.
Some ways to fix this is to, I guess, continue to bring people together, and hopefully we can, reach higher, audience reach higher places, and reach like some people in power, and especially that working with bird names for birds is a big step forward, and hopefully the same as the actions y'all have been taking with the petitions and of bringing people together, and just I guess promote a louder voice, and hopefully the AOS will finally say something about that and give us like a response. And I really think it's shady how like they didn't like respond and they just been silent this whole time. And yeah, so I think that's really
awesome. Thank you. George, what about you?
yeah, so I definitely agree with Isaiah, because the main key is that we would just really like to have our voices heard, to see the changes with the bird names. And so I think, the first thing that comes to mind is the petition, because with bird names for birds, so many people saw that and they signed up for it. And so, I think just maybe creating another one and kind of getting that momentum going, I feel like would probably be, I think, a good idea. So definitely having our voices heard to those who are in high places.
Thank you. And Jess, what about you?
Yeah, so a couple, like those are all really good suggestions. Just a couple more I would throw in. So somebody even brought this up in the chat. So one of the, even though like these are the official bird names currently, and for instance, if I want to publish a scientific paper and reference them, like I kind of got to use the name. There's really nothing stopping you from being, when you go out, like being like, you know what, I'm not going to call that Bullocks Oriole anymore. That's the enchanted Oriole now, and that's just how it is. And I hope they all catch on. So you can do this, and like I've even seen this idea is starting to take off among more people. Like I actually saw a screenshot of somebody who was giving a virtual seminar where they were talking about warbler research, and they had, I forget exactly what he had called the Townsend's warbler instead, but he had used an alternate name and put in quotes, like, as a note of like, yeah, hey, like, this isn't the official name, but hey, maybe this. So like, that's something you can do. Like, if you want to call, if that, that's kind of how names function, really, even though we have a checklist and stuff. Like, if enough people are using it where the old name is no longer actually in common usage, that really puts the pressure to officially change it as well. The other thing is, educate yourself, and we, like I said, we've got profiles up, nowhere near all of them yet, and we've been also covering people outside of North America, because that's another part. Like, there's a lot more interconnections in these histories than we could tell if we just focused on North America. So we've been bringing in others as well, but so we have profiles up there, but there are other, there's also, you can use that as a jumping off point to learn more about some of these people. And then, if people ask, if it comes up when you're out birding with people, if it's something that you have that you're kind of have the privilege to do and be listened to, take it as an opportunity to educate other people, spread the word, explain. This is mainly directed, I guess, at my fellow white people, of like, when you hear people complaining and like, social justice warriors are coming for the birds, like, that's an opportunity for you to jump in and try to educate. And obviously you don't want to put that labor on people who, birders of color who like already have a lot on their plate. But this isn't something you can, this is something that you can do to try to make some change.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to say there's last call for anybody who wants to get questions into the chat while we're waiting for any last ones to filter in. And then I start doling them out to our awesome participants. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who signed up for this event and donated. I just got a message from Molly, and we've raised more than $1,000 for Black AF in STEM, which is incredible. So thank you everybody for your generosity. Black AF in STEM does amazing work, and we're super proud to be able to, help support that work, but we couldn't do it without you. So thank you. And so now to the Q&A. I think that one thing that I saw this question come up a couple of times, and I think that that's for people that don't know whence the names, what's the checklist. I'm just going to turn this over to Jordan, since Jordan knows the most about it, but essentially, like, what is the process for changing the name?
Yeah, well, because I actually, in your intro to this section of the webinar, I was thinking, we are going to put up a slide that has all of our contact information in terms of our social media handles, and then the Bird Names for Birds website and social media. So if your question doesn't get answered right now, please know I am more than happy to connect with you on social media, or our website has an email function, and follow up. Because if you haven't gotten this from this webinar, I really hope you do at this point, which is, it's a community issue. We're talking about bird names, and that means ornithologists, it means birders, it means someone that hears it in a movie or a TV show. So it has this huge impact across the globe, really. And so the way that the bird names get made and then get decided on is really important, both right now for what we're trying to change, but also moving forward. And so there is a committee, a closed committee. It's the acronym is NACC, and they are part of the AOS, the American Ornithological Society. They decide on taxonomy and nomenclature. Basically, how do bird genetics and relationships work in terms of species, as well as nomenclature, which is what we call them. And so for us right now, anyone can submit a proposal for a name change consideration. And if that name change consideration is approved, then the new name would get discussed and decided on. So it's kind of a two-step process, right? And again, you can learn much more on our website. So I'm going to try to direct you there. But right now it's very proposal oriented. And all we know at this point, again, September 26, 2020, is that we need to write proposals for 149 names. It's a completely arbitrary process for English common names, and English common names themselves are completely arbitrary. So it doesn't have to be this way, but it is that way as of right now. So again, I know that's a lot in that nutshell, but hopefully that's a good summary. And again, I'm happy to keep answering questions.
Excellent. I also saw some questions, and I think that we can answer this a little bit, but how to get involved. We will have website links and whatever, so people, there we go. So if you want to get involved with this, you can reach out and be like, I'd like to volunteer, write some social media posts, write a couple bios, talk to people face to face, be like, I'm about to tell you about bird names. Awesome, thank you. This is a question that's for George and Isaiah. Somebody asked, how is the Christian Cooper incident in New York? How did that affect you and your birding experience? George, you want to go first? I see that you're off mute.
Yes. I think I would say it affected me a lot because I understood that Mr. Christian Cooper is pretty much like myself, an African-American man who is just doing his job and out birding. And so, I took it very personal because I saw it as myself. And I remember the day when my mom, she told me about it, and she was like, George, that could have been you. And so, I think it kind of just kind of brought about like how, as a young Black birder, sometimes there are going to be those people who don't want me there, or, who just don't feel comfortable with me being around. So it affected me in a very negative way, but I'm just happy to see the change and the support from everyone who has come and really stood against that. So.
Thank you. And Isaiah, what about you?
Yes, pretty much the same as George. I saw myself in Christian, and especially speaking with me being in South Georgia, where stuff like that, is more likely to happen, and even worse. And I always, from that situation, I feel like I am susceptible for something like that to happen to me here, and it just made me to be more alert whenever I go out birding and to where places as well, and right, that could have happened to me. That really could have happened to me, and yes.
Thank you. I see one question in the chat. Are the English common names determined by the AOS alone, or are there similar processes in Canada, the UK, et cetera, et cetera? Jordan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so that is, don't hesitate to follow up. And I should have mentioned too that the official initiative email address, because I'm seeing folks put their email addresses and I won't be able to capture them, is birdnamesforbirds@gmail.com. But again, you can get that from our website and then also our social media. But so in the US, it's important to know that eBird actually uses a different checklist than the NACC/AOS checklist that we're talking about right now. So it's not the be all end all necessarily, and other countries have different guidelines. The AOS NACC, that there's also a committee for South America, which is a whole nother can of worms conversation in terms of the AOS overseeing South American names. But this is actually a conversation globally happening about maybe we need to all consolidate, all review, have one global checklist that has new updated standards, basically. It's way too early to say how that movement is going, and I think ultimately it's going to be on a much smaller basis that then builds upon to that kind of a pyramid of steps all going in the same direction. But that is a really important thing to take into account. So yeah.
Thank you. I think one last question, since it's starting to get late. And I think this can go to Jordan or Jess, actually, or Isaiah or George, if they know. But somebody's asked, are there documented sources to know what indigenous bird names are? And I guess this is a multi-part question, and the other follow-up would be are you actively seeking that input, and do you need support to find those sources?
Jess, please chime in, but I want to more so respond to the aspect of the initiative, which, as you can see, I'm a co-founder of. I do all of the social media and messaging. So if you reach out, you're talking to me, and I very much not only am trying to reach out and hear from all of these other communities, but also boost them as well. I very much believe that I am trying to create this megaphone for the issue and want to hand that over to all of these other communities. I don't want this to be about me at all. So we are having conversations with other stakeholders, but we will never have enough because, as I mentioned, this impacts everyone. And so the more voices that we can listen to, acknowledge, lift up, the better. So definitely just want to highlight that that's something we are aware of and continually working for. So.
Awesome. Oh, Jess, you're going to say something.
Yeah, and if it's something that you want to educate yourself on, kind of going more from that angle of the question, my biggest suggestion would be, find out whose land you're on, and there it will vary from indigenous group to group, but in a lot of cases there will be within those communities, people trying to compile some of this traditional knowledge and in some cases share it. So for instance, I'm thinking of I lived in Alaska for 6 years, and there's several different indigenous communities up there who have put together books on traditional knowledge of birds, or have websites or apps where they're teaching language skills to try to preserve their languages, but also to share some of the traditional knowledge associated with those environments. And those exist for other indigenous groups as well. So if that's something that you kind of want to just learn for your area, that's one way to go for it. And it will vary from place to place, obviously, but that's one way to do it. And it can be just instructive, from a learning about the place you're living in as well. And there's some of these names that will point out aspects of behavior or whatever that you didn't notice before. So it can be a really interesting thing to do just in its own right. So that would be my suggestions on how to do that.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm just gonna check to, somebody just posted in the chat that there are some indigenous names for the Lenape, which is the community that lives in the New Jersey and New York and Delaware area. So there's a link in there for those who live in New York City if you'd like to learn more. So I think we're gonna call it time, but one thing we'd like to mention is that if you want more of this content, Somebody asked if we were going to be doing another session, and we don't have one planned. However, George and Isaiah on Instagram will be doing more of these live brainstorming sessions. So if you really want to dig down and be like, yes, I would like to, I want to rename every MPID, even though they all look alike. That's, you know, something that you can do is check them out on Instagram. Again, we have their handles up on the screen. I just want to again thank everybody for coming here tonight, and especially thanks to the panelists, Jordan, Jess, Isaiah, and George, for spending the time with us, but also sharing their expertise. I, for one, have learned a lot, and I'm also just deeply grateful for the opportunity to chat with you and, you know, hang out and talk about birds. It's fall migration, so everybody, if you can, get outside and look for all of those, you know, raptors that are going on by. We're going to be up in weird duck time pretty soon, where everybody gets to look at the mergansers and some of the weird ducks that like to hang out in the winter months. So I'm looking forward to that. Molly, I don't know if you have any last things to say. Molly says happy weird duck time. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank y'all for being here. Yeah.
Thanks
for the
everyone.
invite. Yeah.